Well, obviously, it was clear that INEC wasn't ready. It was clear that all the materials had not been put in place. It was clear that almost 1/3 of our voters didn't have their PVCs, that's their permanent voters cards, which would have meant that they would have been disenfranchised completely and excluded from the process. And it was also clear that the security agencies, the armed forces, the SSS, the police, were concerned that they may be overstretched simply because many of the soldiers were being deployed at that time to the war front. So it was clear that they may not be able to cope in terms of supporting the police to conduct a free and fair election and policing all the polls. So for all these reasons, there was a certain element of anxiety on the part, I think, of everybody. And I think something of a relief that, you know, that these things needed to be resolved before we actually went to the polls. And because of that, that anxiety has, you know, somewhat lessened, and we're looking forward to it. Yeah. What didn't cause the change was any kind of support from America or any Western country. We did not get one bullet. We did not get any kind of support from any of our friends in the West, which I think is regrettable and a little bit short-sighted on their part. What changed was the fact that we were able to secure the necessary weapons that we needed. We were able to ensure that our special forces were trained outside the country and brought into the country to be deployed, which was a considerable achievement on our part. We were also able to ensure that the morale of our fighting forces was increased. The support given to them by the President and this administration was enormous. And the resolve was very, very strong that we needed to end this once and for all. And all these things came into play. And I think even the political class, the ruling party, and even the opposition party to a certain extent, to a lesser extent, recognized the fact that, look, let's not play politics with this. Let's sit down and try to fight the enemy, our common enemy, and push them out of our territory. Since that resolve was arrived at, you see a marked change in what's going on. And we're taking back town after town. We're liberating our people. We're pushing back Boko Haram without any kind of support from the West. What also changed was the fact that there was a certain level of collaboration with the countries around us. Cameroons, Niger, and Chad. They've also jumped into the ring, and we're working closely with them. I mean, this reminds me of what we did in ECOMOG, the days of ECOMOG in Sierra Leone and in Liberia, where we collaborated with our West African partners, and we ensured that peace and democracy was returned to those two countries. Well, we're doing it in our country now, and we're pushing back the insurgents. We're fighting hard. Our troops are well armed. Our government is committed to this cause, and that is what changed. And I'm very proud of being associated with a government that is able to do this. French forces, being a very, in my view, a very responsible and sensitive former colonial power, the French have always done the right thing when it comes to their own former colonies. And of course, I'm aware of the fact that the Cameroonians, the Nigerians, that is the people of Niger, the Chadians, have considerable French support. They've always done that with their allies. Well, we were never a French colony, we were a British colony. The British have a different way of doing things. Certainly there are no British forces that are supporting us. British soldiers or British officers have trained some of our officers and some of our special forces, but they have not given us one bullet, not one rifle, not one tank, and neither have the Americans, which I personally, this is my personal view, I think is something of regret. But what it does for us is this. It made us realize, and we realized this a long time ago, that basically when it comes to fighting the insurgents and the terrorists on our soil, that we are basically on our own. Well, we've taken up the challenge and we're defeating them. We're taking back town after town. And I'm very proud of being a Nigerian at this point in time. If you go to places like Syria, if you go to places like Iraq, you know what ISIL is doing. You know what ISIS is doing there. You know that it has been incredibly difficult for the Iraqi forces and the Syrian forces to mount any kind of credible challenge against them. In fact, they needed local support and American support, and they're getting tons of it. Western support, NATO support, they're getting tons of it from Turkey and all the surrounding countries. We are getting very little help here, yet we are doing an exceptionally good job. And I'm very proud of our armed forces and our soldiers that are standing up for Nigeria and pushing back the enemy. Of course, we really have no choice because there is no other electoral body. But, you know, I've expressed, as the spokesman of our campaign organization, on numerous occasions I've expressed my personal concerns and concerns of our campaign organization about the way in which INEC has operated in the past. It's very clear that they were not ready for the election on February the 14th. We are hoping and praying that they will get their act together and they will be ready by the time the election is due. Clearly, our greatest concern is the fact that as at just before February the 14th, like I said earlier, 34% of our voters had been disenfranchised because they were not able to collect their PVCs. It's getting better now, and I'm pleased to say that. I'm also deeply concerned by the fact that there seems to be a level of disparity in permanent voters' cards collections in one part of the country, the northern part of the country, and in the southern part of the country. How it is that INEC can tell us, by their own figures, that 90% of voters' cards had been collected in a place like Borno State at a time when half of Borno State, 50% of the landmass in Borno State was under the control of Boko Haram, and yet 90% of voters are collected their PVCs there. And yet somewhere like Lagos, where there was no war, where there is no war, only about 35% of people had collected their PVCs as at that time, I think is something that needs to be explained. And of course, it's replicated throughout. If you go to the northern states, it was 80, 90%. And if you come down to the south, it's 40, 50% as at that time. Well, things are getting better now, and that's what gives me confidence. I'm also concerned at the fact that in Lagos State, for example, up until very recently, and I might say it may well still be going on, non-Indigenous, that is non-Yoruba people, were being denied their PVCs. And of course, this was primarily because the INEC officials there believe that those non-Indigenous, primarily the Igbos and so on and so forth, were going to go against Buhari and support Jonathan. So these are our potential supporters that are being denied. So these are the concerns. But like I said, in fairness to INEC, they actually, I believe, sacked 2 or 3 officials that did that in Lagos State. And we are hoping and praying that they will get their act together. We have no other INEC, we have no other organization to do this, and we are there to support them and encourage them, but we will not sit by and allow them to allow these disparities to take place, and we just keep quiet. As a matter of fact, most of the northerners that are within the PDP have the same concerns, and we have massive support in the north, have the same concerns that we do. I speak for northerners and southerners, easterners and westerners in my capacity. When I'm talking about north and south, I'm not speaking for the south simply because I'm from the south. I'm speaking about the fact that these figures and these statistics just don't make sense. Now, it's not a question of people being more motivated. And in fact, historically speaking, that is not even true. But let's not go into that. What it is simple logic. There's a civil war going on. It has affected most of the northeastern states. At the time that INEC said they were distributing voters' cards and people were collecting those PVCs, 50% of Borno State, I repeat, was under Boko Haram occupation. Now, it seems very, very illogical to me that you will now tell me that whilst 50% of the state was under Boko Haram occupation, people were entering Boko Haram territory and distributing PVCs, and they were collecting them. That simply never happened. The problem is not with anything other than the fact that INEC simply was not playing according to the rules. Now, I sincerely hope that rather than for anybody to try to rationalize this nonsense and say, oh, northerners vote more than southerners, and this is childish talk, which is, as I said, is historical rubbish. It's just not true. Okay? They should rather get their act together and stop playing games with us. They need to create a level playing field, allow northerners and southerners, Christians and Muslims, every Nigerian, regardless of what your background is, where you come from, to have the ability to get their permanent voters' cards, to express their will at the polls. That's what we're asking them to do. And I think that the fact that they are now making the necessary changes is a good thing for us, and they will eventually do it. There cannot be any kind of rationalization for this disparity. Let me go into it with you a little bit. The eastern states in the south are the most densely populated states in this country, all right? The Igbo states, okay? How come you're telling us, or INEC is telling us, that only 40% or 50% of Igbo people, just before the February 14th date, had collected PVCs? They are eager to vote. Lagos State, and I lived in Lagos most of my life, is a cosmopolitan state, a massive state, densely populated. Everybody's politically active there. And you're telling me that just a week or so, a few days before February 14th election, only 35% of Lagosians collected their PVCs. It's just simply not true. There's something funny going on. I'll also tell you this. The governor of Lagos State himself complained about the fact that he couldn't get his PVC. I'll also tell you this. The Sultan of Sokoto also complained that he couldn't get his PVC. INEC simply did not get their act together. They shouldn't try to rationalize this. Nobody should try to rationalize. You talk about, leaders in the localities collecting PVCs, and then that in itself is wrong. It's not meant to be so. And in fact, I suspect it might even be a breach of the electoral rules if an individual, no matter how highly placed, collects, let's say, 10,000 voters' cards and is the one distributing. I mean, that's fraught with all kinds of legal implications. And I wouldn't want to believe that that's what they're doing. But if that is what they're doing, it still doesn't explain the fact that in a Boko Haram-controlled state, for example, that you're telling me that 90% of the people in Boko Haram-controlled areas collected their PVCs, given the fact that Boko Haram has said that they're against these elections and they will kill anybody that attempts to vote. I'm fairly confident that you may not get 100% result, but at least you get substantial compliance. There are deep concerns. There's no question about that. There are many areas that we're all concerned about when it comes to this new process, which is why some of us, particularly the PDP as a party, has said that they would have suggested to INEC, if they're really having challenges, to allow those with temporary voters' cards to also vote and use those cards. Well, that was rejected by INEC, and that's fair enough. It's their call. But of course, there are some areas that we're concerned about. But by and large, I mean, we don't have much input in this. We have to work with what we have. We are only a political party and a political presidential campaign organization. We are participants. We don't call the shots. INEC calls the shots, and we have to play within their rules. What I can tell you is that I'm confident that whatever system is adopted, whether it is the one they have now or any other one, I believe that our candidate and our party has the support on the ground, and we will win the election, the presidential election, and the subsequent elections. The fact of the matter is we have a formidable opposition in this country. There's no question about it, and I think that's a good thing. Probably the most formidable in the history of our country. And the reason for that is very simple and clear. A number of parties came together. The ACN came together with the CPC and a number of ANPP. These were large parties in themselves. Regional parties, but large parties nevertheless. They came together to form a very, very strong, virile, capable, well-funded, well-organized opposition. The other factor that I think is important is the way they've gone about what they're doing, which is they brought all kinds of sentiments, religious, ethnic sentiments, into their own style of campaign, which is dangerous, but at the same time very, very effective. And it's for all these reasons that we're presented with a formidable opposition with an equally insidious and sinister agenda for this country, which I think that any civilized, decent, right-thinking person ought to move away from. But whatever it is, however strong they are, whatever they try to do to win, however much noise they make, I believe that the PDP as a party and our candidate has gone from strength to strength and is equally formidable. And I'm looking forward to this contest. I mean, I think we will defeat them hands down. It may well be close, but I think it's good for Nigeria to have a close election, an election that is fought in a very virile way, as long as we all keep it within the rules. I mean, it's a good thing for us. It's very easy to square. First time I'm not square, it's a very simple thing. First of all, let me say that I am motivated by my convictions and my views. I've been in the PDP since 2003 when I was spokesman for President Obasanjo, and I was a minister twice in this country on the PDP platform. So I've been in the PDP since 2003 or thereabouts. I left the PDP for 9 months and went to the APC for 2 reasons. Simply because I was not pleased, I was not happy with the way in which Boko Haram was being fought, and I vocalized this on a number of occasions. I felt that our government and our president and our party was not strong enough against Boko Haram. I was labeled as being an extremist at the time, but I was proved right. 25,000 deaths later, I believe that the government, the president, our party now realized that what I was saying earlier was absolutely right, and we needed to take a firmer hand on Boko Haram, and they've done that. That made me reconsider. The second one that made me reconsider was the fact that, this country is made up of a number of ethnic groups, one of which I belong to. I'm a Yoruba, and I was of the view that as at the time I left them, and I vocalized this on a number of occasions before leaving my wider family, like like to call the PDP, was the fact that I felt, as many Yorubas did at the time, that our people, my ethnic group, 50 million of us in this country, had been more or less marginalized by the government. We had no position in the top 20 positions of the country. We were marginalized, and it weakened our hand. And I kept making noise about this. We kept complaining. Nothing was done. And consequently, I left in protest. After I left, the number 4 or 5 position in this country was given to the Yoruba people. We were given the position of Chief of Staff in the Villa, which is a very powerful position. And of course, the fight against Boko Haram was taken seriously, and we began to take the fight up. For these 2 reasons, I reconsidered and I came back to my wider family. But there was a third issue, which I think is very important. Leaving PDP, the wider family, and going into the ranks of the opposition, once I was there, I realized that it just simply wasn't what we thought it would be. I realized that they were playing ethnic politics of the most reprehensible nature. I realized they were playing religious politics of the most dangerous nature. And I realized that they had some kind of illicit alliance with Boko Haram, where their leading presidential candidate or presidential aspirant at that time, General Buhari, supported Boko Haram on a number of occasions, said so publicly and privately. And at the same time, the spokesman of their party came out and said, and this is what did it for me, that the proscription of Boko Haram was unjust and unconstitutional. That was bad enough. But what made it even worse was the proposition of a Muslim-Muslim ticket, which is what they really wanted to do. And when they came up with that formula, I told them from within that, look, I am a Christian. Our country is a multi-religious, secular state, and it is a multicultural state. The minute you begin to start excluding 50% of the population on a ticket by saying you don't want any Christian on your ticket, you are sending the wrong signal, especially in view of the fact that 90% or 95% of your national executive, interim national executive at the time, were made up of Muslims and no Christians, especially in view of the fact that the allegation against APC is the fact that they were stirring up the Yoruba Muslims, where I come from, marrying them to the northern Muslims and saying, this is a Muslim party akin to the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, and we're going to take power through the usage of religion. I was not comfortable with that. And for all these reasons, plus the reforms and the reconsiderations within the PDP, I moved back. Now, let me just say this. You said I've been criticized. Every single major politician in this country, on both sides, particularly in the APC, let me just say in the APC, has changed parties at one point or the other. Atiku, who was a leading presidential aspirant of theirs, our former VP, who is in the APC now, one of the leading members, changed parties 4 times in the space of 5 years. Buhari himself has changed parties. Tinubu himself has changed parties. El Rufai, my good friend, has changed parties. Nuhu Ribadu, my equally good friend, has changed parties. They've gone back and forth a number of times. There are so many people. And when I came back to the PDP, I'm glad to say that it opened the floodgates, and a lot of leading figures that had left the PDP earlier also packed their bags and left the APC and came back to the PDP. So I will always move where I feel that I ought to move to. If I feel that anybody's getting it wrong, I will not be like others and pack my bags and go. I'll criticize privately and publicly from within. And if they continue to get it wrong, I reserve the right to either opt out completely or to move. It's called having the courage of your convictions, regardless of the consequences. And I've done that, and I will continue to do that. Let me add one final point. It's not unusual. This happens in the United Kingdom. It happened recently with a leading MP moving from UKIP to the Conservative Party. It's happened in America on a number of occasions. And I think it's the right and proper thing to do. I will not remain in a political party simply because I've always been there, even where they're getting it wrong. I will go to where I believe that the interests of my nation are best served, and I will always move away from what I consider to be evil. The APC that I was with in 9 months is an evil party and made up of evil people, people that have an Islamist agenda. When I say that, I didn't say a Muslim agenda. There's nothing wrong with being a Muslim, but an Islamist agenda, an Islamic fundamentalist agenda, and it's something that is exceptionally dangerous. It has harbored, or it's fielding, a presidential candidate that is on public record as saying that it is his intention to spread Sharia throughout this country. This is a fact. It's never been denied. It's on record. And I cannot be in a political party that seeks to violate the secularity of my state, that seeks to turn Christians into second-class citizens, that seeks to subject moderate Muslims and the real Muslims into a position of being a second-class citizen, and seek to fly the Islamist, ISIL, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Shabaab flag. I will never do that, no matter what. This is an opposition whose key people. Have you seen the documentary on Bola Tinubu, which has been aired recently? You need to watch this. This is an opposition that's talking about corruption, with Tinubu there, with Rotimi Amechi there. with Buhari there, with all those other people there. They have the nerve to talk about corruption. Rotimi Amechi, with what he's doing in Rivers State, closing down courts, closing down State House of Assembly. I mean, you need to go and study what he's doing there. Tinubu, with his record in public office and that of his acolyte, Fashola, you talk about corruption. Buhari, who 31 years ago put a gun to the temple of a democratically elected president in Nigeria and threatened to blow his brains out unless he stepped down and did a coup. He not only stole the man's seat, he also stole the treasury. He stole everything. Corruption, he's talking about that. That's the greatest act of corruption and the greatest rape of democracy in the history of this country. He's talking about corruption. Look at what he did in PTF. Look at what he did in Petroleum Trust Fund when he was running the place. He was indicted. I was in government at the time. I was working for Obasanjo at the time. I saw the report, Haruna Adamu report. I believe it was 27 billion or thereabouts that went missing. He would have been prosecuted had it not been for the fact that Sirajo, his own brother-in-law, dropped dead the day we decided to prosecute. And he was the man that would have testified against Buhari. He's talking about corruption. In 1977, he was Minister of Oil. 2.7 billion naira went missing under his watch. That's the equivalent of 3 billion naira today. And nothing happened. It was probed. The whole thing was swept under the carpet. He's talking about corruption. Quite apart from all that, what about the corruption of the blood? The corruption of the mind? A man that can get up in this country today and say that an attack on Boko Haram is an attack on the North and it should stop. A man that can say that Boko Haram members should be pampered, should be given allowances, should be sent abroad for education. I mean, it's absurd. And they have the mouth to talk. Let me tell you, they can say what they like, but the Nigerian people will decide in the end. The choice is theirs. It is their will that will be reflected when we go to the field and when we do this election. And that's all that matters to us. They can say anything they like to the international community. They can say anything they like to anybody. At the end of the day, the Nigerian people will reject them and they will support Jonathan because they know in their heart of hearts that Jonathan is an infinitely better person, a far more decent person, a far more honest person, a far more gracious and generous person than anybody in the leadership ranks of the APC. We've always believed in peace, peaceful elections, and if you look at it, if you look at the historical record, it is not our supporters that kill people after they've lost or after things don't go their way. Buhari, as we speak today, is a candidate for the ICC, International Criminal Court of Justice, in The Hague. Proceedings have been filed against him in Amsterdam. Now, the reason I mentioned that is because you raised 2011. And what happened in 2011 was reprehensible. Hundreds of people were slaughtered in his name by his supporters. And up till today, he has not even tendered an apology or expressed any form of remorse for the way in which his supporters conducted themselves. Now, going into this next election, it's very clear that regardless of whatever accord has been entered into by the various candidates, it's very clear that the APC has already violated it. How? Our presidential candidate was campaigning throughout the country. We've been to virtually every state of the Federation, bar 2 or 3. Now, when he went to Bauchi, when he went to Adamawa, when he went to Katsina, and when he went to about 2 or 3 others, Borno, he was stoned. He was stoned by broom-waving, Buhari-chanting supporters. They were stoning him. They stoned his vehicles. On one occasion, they injured 6 of his security people, and they had to be hospitalized. Is that what you do when you have a peace accord? It doesn't stop there. Buhari has said over and over again that if things don't go his way in 2015, that the dog and the baboon would both be soaked in blood. This gives us cause for concern. One of his key supporters, Alhaji Lawal Kaita from Katsina, said recently that they would make this country ungovernable if Jonathan continued in office. This is the kind of things these people say. They say these things, they do these things. Yet we do not retaliate. We simply say all we want is to express our will and to be voted for at an election. At the end of it all, if anybody should be concerned about what would happen, it should be members of the international community and, of course, our own supporters and our leaders, because we've never voiced our intention to be violent. They have constantly threatened violence. Their record shows that whenever they lose, they indulge in massive violence and the killing of many, many people. They are going to lose on this occasion by God's grace. I sincerely hope that everybody in the international community, and certainly I know that the Nigerian people are watching keenly to see what Buhari's reaction to defeat will be. When he was asked this question a couple of weeks back by Arise TV, his response was that, well, if he happy that he will not lose, but that if he does lose, We will now see what will happen after that. That is ominous and that is sinister, and we hold him to that. But what I will tell you is this, that if anybody is killed by Buhari's supporters, as a consequence of his loss in this election, we will not sit by and just watch these things go away like we did before. We will use all lawful means to bring Buhari and all those that are involved to book, because this has to stop. Elections in Nigeria is not about violence, it's simply about expressing a will, and that's what we sincerely hope will happen. Our position has always been that it's important that the police and the relevant INEC officials, and there are 700,000 of them, there are a lot of them, I believe 700,000 or thereabouts of them, need to get the necessary protection that they need in any election. And this has been done over and over again in our history, in our country, particularly in this dispensation between 1999 up to date. It's part of our tradition. The military are deployed to support and protect the voters, the INEC officials, and to stop us from killing one another. The police can't cope on their own. We have a relatively small police force in this country relative to the population, and we need the military to help. It worked in about 5 or 6 states that it happened before. And by the way, out of those 5 or 6 states, I believe the PDP only won 1 or 2. I think I'm right to say they only won 1 in Ekiti. All the other states where soldiers were deployed, the PDP was defeated. The opposition didn't complain then about soldiers siding the PDP and siding the government. So their concerns are misplaced. The fact of the matter is we need to ensure that we have peace in an election. We need to ensure that the various warring parties are kept away from fighting one another. And we need to ensure that the INEC officials that are charged by the Constitution to conduct these elections are well protected. For that, you need the military in place. So we completely reject the idea that the military should not be there. And this assertion or this allegation that the military has somehow used or will be used or can be used against the opposition party has no basis in rationality, has no basis in truth. It's simply not true. INEC is INEC, and we have to work with them. The president himself has said that Jega is an appointee of his, and whatever the case, we have to live with him. I don't concern myself about whether he'll be there or not, or how long he'll be there. That's not my call, that's not my job. My job is to simply speak for our candidate and our presidential campaign organization. And I'll just tell you this, whether it is Jega or anybody else that is there, we intend to do exceptionally well. We're going to work very hard, work in a way that will amaze many people to ensure that our candidate wins. Jega or no Jega, I believe we're going to win this election.